The forest had already swallowed 6 months of hope. Search teams had combed every ravine, every riverbank, and every abandoned trail cabin. Helicopters had hovered until fuel gauges forced them back. Volunteers had marched until their boots split open and their voices cracked from calling one name into endless wilderness. Lily Harper. 7 years old. Missing since early spring. By the time autumn leaves began falling, most people had quietly accepted the truth no one wanted to say out loud. But Ranger Elena Brooks refused to let the case become another cold file buried under paperwork and silence. Elena stood at the edge of the dense Washington forest that morning, adjusting her gloves as frost still clung to fallen leaves. The air smelled like pine, damp earth, and the faint bitterness of winter approaching. Around her, the last official search team prepared for what everyone believed would be a routine closure sweep, one final documented attempt before resources were permanently reassigned. Beside her stood Titan. Titan wasn't just a search horse. He was a legend among rescue units across 3 states. Nearly 16 hands tall, his deep chestnut coat shimmered even in low morning light. His black mane fell like ink across his muscular neck, and his dark, intelligent eyes had helped locate avalanche victims, lost hikers, and stranded campers dozens of times. But Titan carried scars too, both visible and hidden. Before rescue training, Titan had been found wandering near a collapsed ranch after a wildfire destroyed his herd. He had been feral, distrustful, and dangerously unpredictable. Many trainers believed he would never bond with humans again. Only Elena had refused to give up on him. And over 4 long years, Titan chose her back. "Elena, this is just a formality," Captain Harris said, stepping toward her while scanning a tablet. His voice held the practiced calm of someone who had delivered too many quiet disappointments. "We cover the northern ridge, log the sweep, and head back by dusk." Elena nodded, but her attention stayed on Titan, who stood unusually still beneath her gloved hand. His ears twitched toward the forest, rotating slowly as if tracking something no one else could hear. "You good boy," she whispered. Titan exhaled sharply. Search teams began moving in coordinated lines, radio chatter crackling softly through headsets. The forest floor muffled footsteps beneath layers of damp leaves. Sunlight struggled to reach the ground through towering evergreens, creating long, eerie shadows that shifted with every gust of wind. For the first hour, everything followed routine. Titan navigated narrow animal trails with practiced confidence. His hooves stepped carefully over exposed roots and loose stones while Elena scanned the surroundings for signs, broken branches, fabric scraps, footprints preserved in dried mud. Then Titan stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Elena leaned slightly forward in the saddle. "Come on, Titan." The horse didn't move. Ahead of them stretched a narrow clearing surrounded by enormous moss-covered boulders. At the far end stood a dark hollow beneath 2 leaning stone slabs, almost like a shallow cave, partially hidden by thick ivy and creeping vines. Titan's ears snapped forward. His muscles tightened beneath Elena's weight. "Titan," she said again, tapping her heel lightly. Nothing. Behind them, Officer Ramirez approached, guiding another search horse. "Everything all right?" Elena forced a small smile. "He's probably catching a scent." Ramirez chuckled lightly. "Or protesting over time." But Titan shifted his weight and stepped sideways, blocking the path entirely. His nostrils flared as he stared directly toward the cave entrance. His breathing grew louder, sharper, almost urgent. Elena felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She had seen Titan react to scents before. To sounds. Even to distant movements invisible to human eyes. But never like this. "All right," she murmured, sliding carefully from the saddle. The moment her boots touched the ground, Titan lowered his head and stomped once, a heavy, deliberate strike against the dirt. Elena frowned. "What's he doing?" Ramirez asked, dismounting. Titan stomped again. Then he pawed at the earth, scraping leaves and soil backward with powerful, controlled movements. "Elena, that's not normal behavior for tracking," Ramirez said quietly. She didn't answer, because Titan suddenly moved forward, just 3 slow steps, then planted himself directly in front of the cave opening, and refused to budge. "Elena, command him," Harris's voice crackled through the radio. He had noticed the delay through GPS tracking. She swallowed. "Working on it." "Elena," Harris repeated, firmer now. "We don't have time for animal instinct detours." She reached for Titan's halter and gently tugged. "Back, boy." Titan jerked his head slightly, not aggressive, not frightened, but defiant. Elena froze. Titan had never refused a direct command from her. Not once. The forest seemed to fall unnaturally silent around them. Even the wind paused as if holding its breath. Titan lowered himself suddenly. Ramirez stepped back in shock as the massive horse folded onto his front knees, pressing his weight firmly against the ground at the cave entrance. "What the hell?" Ramirez whispered. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. Titan wasn't resting. His body was tense, alert, protective. His ears flicked between the cave and Elena as if pleading for her to understand. 6 months of failure pressed heavily against her thoughts. 6 months of parents waiting beside silent telephones. 6 months of search maps filled with red X marks. Elena, Harris's voice returned through the radio, sharper now. Status update. She hesitated. Her entire career told her this was instinctual animal behavior. A distraction. A coincidence. But her heart remembered the wildfire survivor Titan had located beneath 10 feet of ash when search dogs failed. It remembered the avalanche victim he had sensed hours before thermal drones detected body heat. Titan stomped again, harder this time, dirt scattering across Elena's boots. Her breath caught. "Captain," she said slowly into the radio, "I think we need excavation support." There was a pause long enough to feel like an eternity. "Excavation?" Harris repeated. Elena stared at the cave entrance, where vines shifted slightly in the wind, revealing a narrow crack descending into darkness. Titan pressed his nose against the ground and let out a low, trembling whinny. A sound Elena had only heard once before, the day he found his injured herd mate after the wildfire. "Titan doesn't do this unless something's there," she said quietly. Behind her, Ramirez's flashlight beam flickered toward the cave floor, illuminating disturbed soil mixed with flattened leaves, and something else. A faint, faded strip of pink fabric barely visible beneath layers of dirt. Ramirez crouched slowly, brushing soil away with shaking fingers. "Elena," he whispered. She stepped closer, her heart slamming painfully against her ribs. The fabric fragment was small, torn, but unmistakable. Children's clothing. The radio erupted with voices as Elena knelt beside Titan, her gloved hand resting against his trembling neck. The forest, silent for 6 long months, suddenly felt like it was about to reveal something it had hidden far too long. And Titan still refused to move. The forest air grew colder as the radio chatter intensified. Within minutes, Captain Harris ordered all nearby teams to redirect toward Elena's location. The usual calm discipline of a search operation began to shift into something sharper, heavier, a fragile mixture of hope and fear no one dared to name out loud. Elena remained kneeling beside Titan, her palm resting against his powerful shoulder. The horse's muscles trembled beneath her touch, but he still refused to stand. His ears remained locked forward toward the cave entrance as if guarding it from the entire world. "Easy boy. I'm here," she whispered, though her own voice shook. Officer Ramirez carefully brushed away more dirt from the pink fabric. As the soil cleared, the strip revealed itself as part of a small sleeve, faded, mud-stained, and worn by time and moisture. The sight punched the air out of Elena's lungs. 6 months. 6 entire months this forest had hidden whatever truth waited beneath them. "Captain, we've confirmed child-sized clothing material," Ramirez reported, his voice unsteady over the radio. A long silence followed, broken only by static and the distant rumble of approaching ATVs carrying excavation equipment. Elena slowly stood, her boots crunching against scattered leaves. Titan shifted slightly but stayed firmly planted, lowering his head until his nose touched the exact spot where Ramirez had uncovered the fabric. Almost like he was pointing. "Ramirez, mark the perimeter," Elena said, her training taking control despite the storm raging inside her chest. Bright orange flags quickly appeared, outlining a rough circle around Titan's position. Within minutes, additional officers arrived, their expressions darkening as they saw the scene. No one spoke loudly. The weight of possibility pressed down on every movement. Captain Harris arrived last, stepping off his ATV with a stiff, controlled stride. He studied Titan first, the massive horse still kneeling at the cave entrance, before turning his gaze toward Elena. "You're certain about this behavior?" he asked quietly. She nodded. Titan has never ignored a command. Not once. If he's holding ground like this, he believes something is here. Harris inhaled slowly, his eyes drifting toward the cave's shadowed opening. "Then we proceed carefully." Excavation tools replaced radios in gloved hands. Officers began clearing debris layer by layer, working around Titan with cautious respect. Every shovel strike felt too loud in the suffocating silence of the forest. Elena watched each movement with clenched fists. Her mind replayed the day Lily vanished. The news coverage, the desperate search maps, the broken voices of Lily's parents during press conferences. She remembered the way Lily's father had described his daughter as sunlight with freckles. And now sunlight barely touched this hidden hollow. Titan suddenly shifted again, letting out a sharp snort. His front hooves scraped violently at the dirt, scattering soil across the excavation zone. "Whoa, easy!" Ramirez stepped back. But Elena raised her hand. "Stop digging." The team froze. Titan lowered his head and pressed his nose deeper into a newly exposed patch of earth slightly to the left of the original spot. Elena's heart hammered. "Dig there," she said softly. Harris hesitated for only a second before nodding. The team redirected. Shovels bit into the soil, revealing darker, wetter earth beneath the surface. Minutes stretched into agonizing silence, broken only by the scrape of metal against dirt and the occasional rustle of wind through pine branches. Then a shovel struck something solid. Contact, an officer called. Everyone froze. Carefully, hands replaced tools. Soil was brushed aside slowly, revealing a small, weathered backpack. Its zipper rusted, its surface coated in mud and roots. Elena staggered back a step. Ramirez lifted it gently, as if holding something sacred. The front pocket hung partially open, revealing a small stuffed rabbit toy with one missing ear. The same toy that had appeared in every missing person poster across the state. "Oh my God," someone whispered. Elena pressed her hand over her mouth as tears burned behind her eyes. For the first time in 6 months, undeniable proof sat in front of them. Lily had been here. But Titan wasn't finished. The horse suddenly stood up, towering over the group. For a brief moment, Elena thought he might bolt, but instead he stepped forward and turned slightly toward the cave opening itself. Then he stomped again. Harder. The sound echoed inside the hollow cave like a thunderclap. "Elena," Harris murmured. She stepped closer to the cave entrance, her flashlight trembling in her grip. Vines clung thickly to the stone slabs, hiding a narrow passage descending into darkness. A cold draft seeped outward, carrying a faint, stale scent that made her stomach twist. "We need lights and rope," she said. Within minutes, portable floodlights illuminated the cave entrance. Officers secured climbing harnesses while Harris studied the unstable rock formation above the opening. "This structure could collapse," he warned. "We go in carefully, single file." Elena clipped her harness with steady hands, though her pulse raced wildly. Titan nudged her shoulder gently, his dark eyes meeting hers. For a brief second, she felt something pass between them, urgency and trust. "I'll be back," she whispered. As Elena ducked beneath the low stone opening, the air changed instantly. The cave swallowed sound, replacing forest life with dripping water and echoing breaths. The narrow tunnel sloped downward, forcing her to move slowly while her flashlight beam cut through floating dust particles. Behind her, Ramirez followed, his boots crunching against loose gravel. "Elena, you okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her throat felt too tight to speak. The tunnel opened into a small underground chamber barely large enough to stand upright. The flashlight beam swept across jagged stone walls, then froze. Scratches. Deep, uneven claw marks covered one side of the chamber, as if something had desperately tried to dig its way out. Ramirez swallowed hard. "Animal?" Elena stepped closer, her chest tightening. The marks weren't fresh, but they weren't ancient either. Small scraps of fabric clung to rough stone edges nearby. Her flashlight trembled as she moved the beam across the chamber floor. And then she saw it. A narrow depression in the dirt, shaped almost like a small sleeping area. Next to it sat an empty water bottle, crushed, dirt-stained, but unmistakably modern. Ramirez's breath caught. Someone survived down here? Elena's pulse roared in her ears as hope collided violently with fear. If Lily had sheltered here, where was she now? Above them, muffled through layers of stone, Titan suddenly screamed, a sharp, piercing whinny that echoed through the cave like a warning. Both officers froze. "Elena," Ramirez whispered. She turned toward the tunnel entrance, her heart pounding with a terrifying realization. Titan wasn't celebrating. He was alerting. Something else was coming. And somewhere deep within the forest, branches cracked, slow, heavy, and moving closer. Titan's scream ripped through the forest like a siren. Above the cave, every officer froze. Radios crackled with overlapping voices as birds exploded from treetops, scattering into the pale autumn sky. Titan reared slightly, stomping the ground with violent urgency, his ears pinned toward the deeper forest beyond the ridge. Captain Harris grabbed his radio. "All units, defensive perimeter now." Something spooked the animal, "Stay alert." 2 officers rushed toward Titan, attempting to steady him, but the massive horse jerked his head free and stepped sideways, positioning himself directly in front of the cave entrance again. His body formed a living shield, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he stared into the tree line. Inside the cave, Elena and Ramirez exchanged a tense glance as Titan's warning echoed through the stone chamber. "That didn't sound like panic," Ramirez said quietly. "That sounded like a warning." Elena's stomach tightened. Titan had only made that sound once before, during a mountain rescue 3 years earlier when a landslide had nearly buried their entire team alive. He sensed danger long before it reached human senses. She grabbed her radio. "Captain, Titan believes something is approaching your position." Static filled the line before Harris responded, his voice tight. "We're hearing movement in the eastern tree line. Possibly wildlife. Continue interior search but remain ready to evacuate." Elena nodded, though the unease in her chest refused to fade. She turned her flashlight back toward the small chamber. The sleeping depression, The crushed bottle, the fabric scraps, they all whispered one terrifying possibility. Lily hadn't just passed through this place. She had lived here, at least for a while. Fine. Oh, look at this, Ramirez said, crouching near the chamber wall. She stepped closer, her light joining his. Near the scratched stone marks, faint charcoal-like drawings covered the rock surface. They were crude, uneven, clearly drawn by small, shaky hands. One drawing showed a large horse shape with long legs and a flowing mane. Beside it stood a tiny stick figure holding what looked like a flower. Elena's throat tightened painfully. She drew Titan, Ramirez whispered. But another drawing sat beside it. A second figure. Much taller. Jagged lines formed long arms, exaggerated shoulders, and dark scribbled circles where eyes should have been. Around that figure, heavy black strokes surrounded the shape like shadows or smoke. Ramirez leaned closer. Is that a person? Elena didn't answer immediately. The childlike drawing radiated fear so deeply it made her skin prickle. Above them, Titan stomped again. Harder. Then came the distant crack of snapping branches. Harris's voice burst through the radio. Movement confirmed. The transmission cut off briefly, replaced by sharp static and muffled shouting. Elena, stand by. Harris returned, breath heavier now. Possible bear activity near your location. We're deploying deterrent rounds. Elena's pulse surged. Black bears weren't uncommon in these forests, but their behavior this late in autumn could be dangerously unpredictable, especially near enclosed spaces like caves. She swept her light across the chamber again, her mind racing. If a bear had discovered this cave months ago, if Lily had been hiding here, a sickening thought formed. Ramirez, we need to finish documenting and get out, she said. But as she turned toward the tunnel exit, her flashlight beam caught something partially buried beneath loose gravel near the chamber's far corner. A small sneaker. Pink and white. Elena's breath shattered in her chest. She knelt slowly, brushing dirt away with trembling hands. The shoe was worn thin, the laces frayed, and dried mud filled the sole's grooves. Inside, faint marker writing remained visible along the inner lining. Ramirez closed his eyes briefly. That's her. Above them, Titan released another violent whinny, louder, sharper, almost desperate now. Then came shouting. Elena, now. Harris yelled through the radio. The forest erupted with chaos, officers shouting commands, branches crashing, and the unmistakable deep roar of a massive animal echoing across the ridge. Elena grabbed the sneaker and shoved it into an evidence bag as she and Ramirez scrambled toward the tunnel entrance. Loose stones shifted beneath their boots as adrenaline surged through their veins. They burst from the cave into blinding daylight. The scene outside had transformed into controlled panic. Officers stood with flare launchers raised while 2 deterrent rounds exploded near the tree line, sending bright flashes and thunderous cracks echoing across the valley. Several yards beyond the perimeter, enormous clawed tracks tore through damp soil, fresh, massive, and unmistakably grisly-sized. That thing's been circling us, one officer shouted. Elena rushed toward Titan, grabbing his halter. The horse trembled violently but refused to retreat. His eyes remained locked on the cave entrance, not the forest. Elena, we need to pull back. Harris barked. But she froze. Titan wasn't reacting to the approaching predator. He was protecting the cave. Protecting something inside. Captain, she said slowly, if Lily sheltered here, and a bear discovered this cave later. Harris's expression darkened with grim understanding. Ramirez stepped closer. You're thinking she escaped before the bear moved in? Elena's pulse pounded. Or someone helped her escape. A heavy silence fell as the implications settled over the team. If Lily had left this cave alive, then 6 months of searching might have been looking in the wrong direction entirely. Suddenly Titan jerked forward, dragging Elena 2 steps before she steadied him. The horse's ears flicked wildly between the forest and the cave, as if tracking 2 separate threats. Then he turned sharply and began pacing along the cave's outer wall, his hooves striking the ground in rapid, agitated rhythms. What's he doing now? Ramirez asked. Elena followed Titan's movement closely. The horse circled toward the backside of the moss-covered boulders, stopping near a thick cluster of fallen tree trunks tangled in ivy. Titan lowered his head and sniffed the ground intensely, then started pawing again. Faster this time. More frantic. Elena, there's no cave opening here, Harris said cautiously. But Titan continued digging, ripping through leaves, dirt, and tangled roots with explosive force. Soil sprayed across the clearing as officers rushed to assist, clearing debris from the area he targeted. Within moments, one officer uncovered splintered wood beneath the surface. Captain, looks like boards, maybe a hatch or old structure. Elena's heart lurched violently as officers tore away the remaining dirt, revealing what looked like an old, rotted trapdoor partially hidden beneath fallen logs and vegetation. The wood was weathered, but far newer than the surrounding forest decay. Ramirez swallowed hard. This wasn't natural. Titan stepped back, snorting loudly as if urging them to continue. Harris signaled cautiously. Pry it open. Two officers forced crowbars beneath the warped wooden edges. The boards groaned, cracking slowly as the hinges resisted, then finally snapped free with a sharp, echoing crack. The trapdoor swung open. Cold, stale air surged upward from a narrow underground shaft reinforced with crude wooden beams. Elena stepped closer, her flashlight cutting into the darkness below. Child-sized. The sound barely existed. It floated through the forest like a fragile memory, soft, broken, almost swallowed by the distant roar echoing between the trees. For a moment, Elena wasn't sure if her mind had created it out of desperation. But Titan heard it too. The massive horse froze, his entire body locking into razor-sharp stillness. His ears shot forward, nostrils flaring as he turned slowly toward the north ridge, away from the cave and the exposed shaft. Elena, Ramirez whispered. Did you hear that? She didn't answer. Her pulse thundered so loudly she feared it might drown out the sound completely. She tightened her grip on Titan's halter as the wind shifted again. And there it was. A faint cry. Help. The single word sliced through the forest like lightning. Every officer turned toward the sound simultaneously. Captain Harris raised his radio. All units, audio confirmation. Possible survivor vocalization North Ridge, approximately 200 yards. Move, but maintain defensive formation. That grizzly is still in the area. Adrenaline surged through Elena's veins as she vaulted back into Titan's saddle. The horse barely waited for her command. The moment her boots settled into the stirrups, Titan lunged forward, charging through the underbrush with explosive speed. Branches snapped against Elena's jacket as Titan navigated narrow animal trails with terrifying precision. Officers followed behind on foot and horseback, radios barking overlapping commands as the forest seemed to close in around them. Elena, slow him down. Harris shouted through the radio. I can't, she yelled back, gripping Titan's mane as he surged uphill. He knows where he's going. Titan leapt over a fallen pine trunk, his hooves barely touching the forest floor before launching forward again. Elena felt the horse's muscles burn beneath her, driven by something deeper than training, something instinctual, almost desperate. Then Titan skidded to a sudden stop at the base of a steep rocky slope. Elena's breath caught. Above them, partially hidden beneath tangled blackberry bushes and shattered stone, sat the remains of an abandoned ranger lookout cabin. Its roof collapsed, its walls leaning at dangerous angles after years of storms and neglect. And from somewhere inside, a weak sob echoed. Elena. Ramirez's voice came from behind as he and two officers caught up, gasping for breath. That place isn't stable. It could collapse any second. Titan stomped violently, pulling Elena closer toward the ruined structure. The horse's head swung toward a narrow opening where broken wooden beams formed a jagged entrance barely large enough for a child to crawl through. Elena, wait for structural support. Harris ordered, still climbing the slope below. But then the voice came again. Please don't go. The words shattered Elena's hesitation. She slid from Titan's back and rushed toward the opening, ignoring the sharp thorns tearing at her sleeves. Dropping to her knees, she pushed through the collapsed beams, splinters scraping against her gloves as she crawled into the unstable wreckage. The interior smelled of mold, wet wood, and cold dust. Sunlight filtered through broken roof panels, casting trembling beams of light across the debris-covered floor. Elena, be careful. Ramirez called from behind as he followed her inside. Elena, is someone there? The tiny voice trembled from deeper within the structure. Elena's heart nearly stopped. Yes, she shouted, her voice cracking. My name is Elena. You're safe. We're here to help you. A soft whimper echoed back. She crawled deeper, pushing aside shattered boards and fallen insulation. Her flashlight beam swept across the ruined interior, then froze. In the far corner, beneath a collapsed table and torn blankets, a small figure curled tightly against the wall. Mud-streaked blonde hair clung to a pale face. Sunken cheeks framed wide, terrified eyes. The child's oversized jacket, clearly adult-sized, swallowed her tiny frame as she clutched the one-eared stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. Elena's breath shattered into a sob. Lily, she whispered. The girl blinked slowly, as if trying to confirm the moment was real. Tears streaked down her dirt-covered cheeks. You came back, Lily whispered hoarsely. Elena carefully pushed debris aside and reached out, her movements slow and gentle, like approaching a frightened animal. We never stopped looking for you, sweetheart. Never. Lily's lip trembled violently. The big horse, he kept coming. He told me you would find me. Elena froze, glancing briefly toward the cabin entrance where Titan's shadow stood just outside the broken doorway. The horse watched silently, his dark silhouette framed by autumn sunlight. You saw Titan before? Elena asked softly. Lily nodded weakly. When I was hiding in the cave, He would stand outside sometimes. He scared the big monster away. Ramirez swallowed hard behind her. Monster? Lily's tiny fingers tightened around the rabbit toy. The huge bear. It came inside the cave one night. I ran through the tunnel ladder and hid in the woods. I followed the horse tracks. I thought he was trying to show me where to go. Elena felt her chest tighten painfully as the child spoke. Lily hadn't just survived. She had followed Titan's movements through the forest, unknowingly tracing the same search patterns the rescue teams had repeated for months. But the cabin, Elena asked gently. I fell and hurt my leg, Lily whispered. I couldn't walk far anymore. I waited for the horse to come back. Ramirez quickly radioed for medical support while Elena wrapped her jacket around Lily's fragile shoulders. You're incredibly brave, Elena whispered, brushing dirt gently from the girl's face. Lily's eyes drifted toward the doorway again. Is he still there? Elena turned slightly. Titan stood motionless just outside the collapsed wall, his powerful frame glowing softly in the golden afternoon light. The moment Lily's eyes met his, the horse lowered his head slowly, releasing a low, gentle whinny, soft, comforting, almost like a greeting. Lily smiled faintly for the first time in 6 months. He promised you'd come, she murmured. Outside, Captain Harris and the rest of the team finally reached the cabin. Emergency medics rushed forward as Ramirez carefully lifted fallen debris while Elena cradled Lily gently in her arms. You're safe now, Elena whispered, tears slipping freely down her face. You're going home. As they stepped outside, Titan moved closer, walking beside Elena as if escorting them down the slope. His massive presence created a protective barrier around them as officers scanned the forest for any remaining threats. Medics quickly examined Lily, confirming dehydration, malnutrition, and a fractured ankle, but astonishingly, she was alive, conscious, and stable. The rescue radios erupted with cheers and emotional cries as news spread across the operation channels. 6 months. 6 months of silence had just shattered into a miracle. But as Elena helped Lily into the rescue stretcher, the little girl reached out weakly toward Titan. Can he come with me? She whispered. Elena smiled softly, resting her hand against Titan's neck as the horse leaned closer, his warm breath brushing Lily's small fingers. He already has, Elena said quietly. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Hope didn't feel fragile anymore. Elena exhaled a breath she felt like she had been holding for half a year. Nearby, Captain Harris wiped his face discreetly before clearing his throat and speaking into his radio. All units, survivor confirmed alive. Repeat, Lily Harper is alive. The words echoed across frequencies and patrol channels. Cheers, stunned laughter, and broken sobs erupted through every radio speaker. Officers who had searched for months dropped their heads in disbelief. Volunteers miles away collapsed onto fallen logs, crying openly into their gloves. Hope had returned, led by a horse that refused to give up. Inside the helicopter, Lily stirred weakly and reached toward the open door. Elena! Elena stepped forward quickly, placing a gentle hand over the child's small fingers. Lily's eyes fluttered open. Is Titan coming? She whispered. Elena glanced back at the towering horse standing only a few feet away. Titan's dark eyes reflected the spinning helicopter lights, calm but watchful. He'll be right behind you, Elena promised softly. Lily smiled faintly before drifting back into exhausted sleep as the helicopter doors slowly closed. The aircraft lifted into the evening sky, carrying the miracle the entire state had prayed for. Elena watched until the helicopter disappeared beyond the tree line, her chest heavy with relief and overwhelming pride. Behind her, Captain Harris approached quietly. I've worked rescue operations for 23 years, he said, folding his arms as he studied Titan. I've seen trained dogs locate survivors under concrete. I've seen drones detect heartbeats through avalanche snow. He paused, shaking his head slowly. But I've never seen anything like what that horse did today. Elena rested her forehead briefly against Titan's neck, feeling the horse's warm breath against her shoulder. He didn't just find her, she said quietly. He stayed with her, even when we couldn't. The following weeks transformed into a whirlwind of national attention. News helicopters circled the hospital where Lily recovered. Headlines spread across the country, calling Titan the guardian of the forest and the horse who waited. But inside the hospital room, the story unfolded far more quietly and far more beautifully. Lily sat upright in her hospital bed, her ankle secured in a bright pink cast covered in signatures from nurses and rescue officers. Sunlight streamed through the window as Elena entered the room, still wearing her ranger uniform. Hey, sunshine, Elena said gently. Lily's face lit up instantly. Did he come? Elena stepped aside, revealing Titan standing calmly in the hospital courtyard below, surrounded by careful handlers and stunned visitors. The horse's chestnut coat glowed beneath the afternoon sun, his mane lifting slightly in the breeze. Lily pressed her hands against the glass, her eyes filling with tears. He came back, she whispered. Doctors and administrators had initially protested bringing a full-sized rescue horse near the hospital grounds. But after national media attention and overwhelming public support, they made a rare exception. Titan had become more than a search animal. He had become a symbol of survival. Weeks later, Lily's parents finally stood beside Titan at the Harper family ranch, their daughter balanced carefully between them as she slowly learned to walk again with crutches. Tears streamed freely down both parents' faces as they watched Lily reach out toward the horse who had unknowingly guarded her through the darkest months of her life. "Thank you," Lily's father whispered, pressing his forehead gently against Titan's shoulder. "You brought our daughter home." Titan simply lowered his head, breathing softly against Lily's cast as she giggled and hugged his neck. But the story didn't end there. As winter melted into spring, Elena made a life-changing decision. With permission from the rescue department and Lily's family, she began training Titan for a new role, not just as a search horse, but as a therapy and trauma recovery companion for lost and rescued children. Titan adapted faster than anyone expected. Children who refused to speak after traumatic rescues often opened up within minutes of standing beside him. His calm presence created a silent language of safety no human could replicate. Lily became Titan's first official therapy partner. Together, they visited hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and search and rescue training programs across the region. Wherever they went, the story followed, a reminder that hope sometimes arrives on four hooves. Months later, during a public ceremony honoring search and rescue teams, Captain Harris stepped onto a small stage surrounded by officers, volunteers, and families whose lives had been touched by Titan's work. "We train for logic," Harris told the crowd, his voice steady but emotional. "We train for discipline. But sometimes, rescue requires something we cannot measure. Loyalty, instinct, and a bond stronger than fear." He turned toward Titan and Lily standing beside Elena at the front of the crowd. "Today, we honor a horse who refused to leave, and because of that, a child came home alive." The audience rose into a standing ovation as Lily hugged Titan's neck, her laughter echoing across the ceremony grounds. Elena watched the moment unfold, her eyes glistening as she rested her hand against Titan's shoulder. She remembered the frightened, feral animal she had first met years ago, broken by wildfire, terrified of human touch. And now, he was healing others. As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in deep gold and amber, Lily leaned close to Titan's ear and whispered something only he could hear. The horse flicked his ears gently and exhaled a soft, contented breath. And somewhere deep within the forest that had once hidden heartbreak and fear, the wind carried a quiet reminder. Sometimes, heroes don't wear uniforms. Sometimes, they simply refuse to walk away.